Hi, we're back with Philip Simmons' book, Learning to Fall, The Blessings of an Imperfect Life. Chapter 2, Getting Up in the Morning and Other Essential Duties. Emperors don't get much airtime in American culture today. And when we think of a Stoic philosopher, we see a man in a toga with a bad haircut. To most of us, Stoicism means stuffing our feelings, shunning the pleasures of the flesh, and refusing to exercise our constitutional right to feel sorry for ourselves in public. So you may wonder what odd and possibly masochistic impulse has me wanting to write about Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the Roman emperor and Stoic. Perhaps you'll forgive my eccentricities, seeing as everything I do these days I do with the urgency of a man whose days are numbered. Living with Lou Gehrig's disease, seeking both physical health and spiritual healing, I've learned to accept help from any quarter. I've consulted priests and shamans and psychics, beekeepers and body workers and aura balancers, naturopaths and homeopaths and neurologists, herbalists and acupuncturists, and psychotherapists. I've even gone so far as to join a church and sing in the choir. Why not then seek help from a Roman emperor? I don't mean to say that my diagnosis makes me special. Life, as I've said before, is a terminal condition. Those of us with terminal illnesses simply have been blessed, and I mean blessed, with having the facts of our own mortality held constantly before us. But we all bear the burdens of the flesh, and all of us at certain times in our lives, in the face of failure, loss, illness, and finally our certain ends, find ourselves asking, why get up this morning? And given what I'm facing, what work is there for me to do in this world that can possibly make a difference? Lately, I've come to feel quite strongly that answering these questions begins with acceptance. Not resignation, not passivity, but a profound and thorough acceptance of our place in the natural order. Not only must we accept our own deaths as a necessary part of that order, but we must come to see that it is our very mortality that calls us to act according to our highest nature. It is out of our acceptance of all that we are, including and especially that we are creatures that will one day die, that we are called to our highest human duties. Death, in other words, is good for us. To explain how Marcus Aurelius Antoninus has helped me to understand these things, I'll have to go by way of the dump. When I'm not teaching college in the Midwest, I live near my parents in a small town in New Hampshire, where, as in many such towns, there are three real centers of civic life: the general store, the post office, and the dump. When I was spending summers there as a child, about the only time I got to spend with my father was while we were working together on something. And so I have fond memories of our trips to the dump. The work was tedious and smelly, and I don't suppose we talked a whole lot, but it was good simply to be in my father's presence, admiring the manly assurance with which he hefted the barrels and bags into the back of the station wagon and drove us the few miles across town. In those days, the dump was a male realm, and for a boy like me, skinny, shy, awkward at sports, it was good to be initiated into its rituals, backing our load up to the heap, dropping the tailgate, then practicing my shot put form as I learned to balance a sack at my shoulder and one-handedly heave it up and out. A way of dancing, I suppose, and sacred in the way that all such ordinary dances are. Perhaps most satisfying was to see my father at ease in that setting, a man among men. My father worked long hours outside of the home. Being quiet sorts, my folks didn't entertain much, and as the parents of 5 boys were rarely invited to bring their children along to dinner parties. That's why when the last empty barrel was thumped back in the station wagon, I was almost startled to hear my father hailed by another man, a friend or neighbor. digging a hole with the toe of my boot or pitching stones at seagulls, I would hide my joy at overhearing what to me was the rarest of things: easy, everyday, grown-up male talk. It was as though the gods were speaking overhead and had allowed me to listen in. Gods, and my father was one of them. Back then, the dump was really a dump. Once a week from our home across town, we would see the air smudged with its burning. Nowadays, of course, it's not a dump, but a waste transfer facility with its bins of colored glass and grated plastic, newspapers bundled with twine, and non-recyclables hydraulically mashed in a dumpster to be hauled off on a truck to some prophylactic landfill far from the 100 square miles of swamp and granite ledge that is our town's portion of paradise. In fact, during my visit here last winter, there were engineers with clipboards overseeing the entombment beneath layers of carefully graded gravel and plastic and clay of that heap we so recklessly built and burned all the heedless days of my youth. Fortunately, some of the old ways die hard, and despite its new name, everyone in town still calls the place the dump. Even better, friends and neighbors still meet there to discuss the weather, exchange news, inquire after the sick, lobby their selectmen, arrange for carpentry, plumbing, and tree work, plot political strategy, and generally do the casual work of creating the sort of world fit for humans to live in. The old ways also required that every dump have its dump man, that fellow whose job it was to keep an eye on things, but who spent most of his time, as everybody knew, huddled in his shack attending to the business of staying warm. While times being what they are, our town no longer has a dump man, but a dump lady. And since she runs not a dump, but a waste transfer facility, she spends less time keeping warm and more time keeping an eye on things. Also, times being what they are, our dump lady is a millionaire, having won the lottery a few years back. Sudden wealth has not lessened her zeal for her work, though. To the contrary, you go to the dump now anxiously, fearful that while emptying a few scraps of sheetrock and old window screening into the compactor, Marilyn will descend upon you, all the scolding, bustling bulk of her, face a squint from the cigarette hanging in the corner of her mouth, directing you firmly to the building materials dumpster, and perhaps even suggesting an extra fee for disposing of that suspicious-looking pile of paint cans in the back of your pickup truck. A former factory worker who prefers the dump because the town pays health insurance, Marilyn is the best there is: aggressive, exacting, a professional. It's another New Hampshire tradition that you go to the dump not simply to throw out your trash, but to look for things that might be useful. There's a saying that you know you're really from New Hampshire if you leave the dump with more than you came with. Marilyn helps out here, sorting out useful items and setting them aside in an area she calls the swap shop. When my wife and I were building and furnishing our house here, Marilyn began setting aside things she thought we might like, and her swap shop provided us with several windows, a screen door, a fine old rocking chair for the porch, a set of glassware, waffle iron, blender, toaster oven, children's books, clothing, and an old feather bed. In New Hampshire, where thrift is a household god, there is no shame attached to such scavenging. Most people here have someplace at home where they tuck away things that might be useful at some future date. The poet Donald Hall has suggested that instead of "live free or die," New Hampshire license plates should read, "It might come in handy." The best place to keep all those things that might come in handy is, of course, the barn. Our barn actually serves as my wife's sculpture studio. And one day last summer, I saw that Catherine had put a row of books on a shelf amidst her sculptor's tools. These books, salvaged from Marilyn's swap shop, were not texts to be read, but sculptural materials to be hacked, drilled, sawed, lacquered, slathered in plaster, and cast in bronze. This is a woman who has married a writer and professor of English literature. While 50 yards away, I'm in my cabin in the woods writing books. She's in her studio inflicting various tortures upon them. And in this regard, you could say we have the perfect marriage. As chance would have it, on that day, I rescued from her shelf one small leather-bound volume, a 1929 edition, printed in Great Britain, of The Meditations of the Emperor, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, a book I had heard much about, but never read. I took an immediate liking to Aurelius. He slept on a bare board, ate little, prayed to his gods, and commanded an empire. He thought continuously of his own death. And when I read his words, I know I met a soul worth reckoning with. Let it make no difference to thee whether thou art cold or warm, if thou art doing thy duty, and whether thou art drowsy or satisfied with sleep, and whether ill-spoken or praised, and whether dying or doing something else. For it is one of the acts of life, this act by which we die. It is sufficient then in this act also to do well what we have in hand. Whether dying or doing something else. The casualness of that phrase. I imagine Aurelius getting off of his board in the morning and making his to-do list for the day. 1. Breakfast with Faustina. 2. Address the Senate on the need to defend the northern frontier. 3. Prune rose bushes, sacrifice goat. 4. Die. 5. If not, lead army against the barbarians. Apparently, Aurelius wrote his meditations as notes to himself for his own benefit. He reveres the natural order, writing that all things are implicated with one another, and the bond is holy. For him, to be connected to all things and all people is to be humbled, for, quote, Asia, Europe are corners of the universe, all the sea, a drop in the universe, ethos, a little clod of the universe, all the present time, a point in eternity, close quote. Because all things are connected, good and bad are connected, and deserve equally our reverence. All things are little, changeable, perishable. All things come from God, from that universal ruling power. And accordingly, the lion's gaping jaws, and that which is poisonous, and every harmful thing, as a thorn, as mud, are after products of the grand and beautiful. Do not then imagine that they are of another kind from that which thou venerate, but form a just opinion of them all. Our challenge then is to accept all that befalls us as belonging to the natural order, to see nothing that happens to us as foreign. Nothing can happen to any man which is not a human accident, nor to an ox which is not according to the nature of an ox, nor to a vine which is not according to the nature of a vine, nor to a stone which is not proper to a stone. If then there happens to each thing both what is usual and natural, why shouldst thou complain? For the common nature brings nothing which may not be borne by thee. Among life's other accidents, we must accept death. Do not despise death, but be well content with it, since this too is one of those things which nature wills. As thou waitest for the time when the child shall fall out of thy wife's womb, so be ready for the time when thy soul shall fall out of this envelope. To accept death is to live with a profound sense of freedom. The freedom first from attachment to the things of this life that don't really matter. Fame, material possessions, and even, finally, our own bodies. Acceptance brings the freedom to live fully in the present, the freedom finally to act according to our highest nature. Everywhere and at all times, it is in thy power piously to acquiesce in thy present condition, and to behave justly to those about thee. Only when we accept our present condition can we set aside fear and discover the love and compassion that are our highest human endowments. And out of our compassion, we deal justly with those about us, not just on our good days, not just when it's convenient, but everywhere and at all times, we are free to act according to that which is highest in us. And in such action, we find peace. But it is with acceptance that we must begin. To see what that might look like, let's go back to the dump. The reason our dump is now a waste transfer facility and not a dump is that 100 yards downhill from the dump is a swamp dammed up by beavers to make a shallow, reedy pond. And out of that pond in the early summer, the snapping turtles crawl up on land looking for a place to lay their eggs. One day I went to the dump with my own son, Aaron, who was then 6 years old. We arrived to see a turtle making its nest in a pile of sand that had been bulldozed to the dump's edge. She had laid her eggs in a pit about a foot deep and 2 feet across. But by the time we got there, Marilyn had already removed the eggs from the nest to save them from the raccoons, planning to incubate them at home and return the hatchlings to the swamp. If the turtle knew that the eggs were gone, she seemed unconcerned. And what my son and I watched was a snapping turtle with a shell the size of a hubcap trying to crawl out of a sandy hole. No matter how many times you've heard the story of the tortoise and the hare, you've never really understood it until you've watched a turtle get where it needs to go. She had a bad time of it. The sand was loose, the sides of the pit kept crumbling beneath her, tumbling her back to the bottom. Each time she fell, she resumed her climb without pause, stubby legs churning at the same slow, relentless pace, webbed claws shoveling sand behind her, her prehistoric head with its fabled jaw thrust forward, implacable as time itself. Pathetically, she made no progress, and after a while we turned to the business of dumping trash and sorting bottles, as I explained to my son that Marilyn or somebody would eventually help her out. But that didn't happen. By the time Aaron and I had finished our chores and turned to look again, the turtle was gone. No one had helped her. Though we had not been attending to her business, she clearly had. And now she was down in the swamp again, getting on with whatever else needed doing that day. I have seen other turtles. Out driving in early summer, you'll encounter them on the roads, where the road dips to cross a stream. I once stopped my car in the middle of a bridge to let one cross. It must have climbed out of the stream some 15 feet below, and I got out of my car to watch it haul itself across the asphalt until it reached the bridge's edge, and then, not knowing it was on a bridge, tip over the edge to plunge back down into the stream from which it had come. Though I don't know how the turtle felt about this, I felt awful. But while I was busy entertaining my frustration at the wasted effort, while I was busy making the turtle's fall an emblem for all the botched beginnings and abrupt endings of my days, the turtle was busy swimming to the shore and hauling itself out to begin the long climb up the bank again. As if to say to me, where I stood swaddled in my mooning and moaning self, as if to say, see how I dance? See how it's done? I was in the kitchen one day with my daughter Amelia, who's 6 years old. My children know that my hands give me trouble now with little things, all the zippers and clasps and buckles and screws with which we like to think we hold our world together. And Amelia must have remarked on this, and then our conversation went this way. My hands don't work very well, but I can still hug you. And what if your arms don't work, she asked. Then you'll have to hug me, I said. As long as you hug me, I'll be okay. Now my daughter has a lawyer's precision and a nose for cheap sentiment. Well, Papa, she said, if I don't hug you, you can still survive. There's nothing to say to this, of course. She knows what the turtle knows, and she's right. I can survive. And being human, I know more. Not only that I can survive, but that I am blessed. Each day that I can get out of bed in the morning, I am blessed. Each day that any of us can move our limbs to do the world's work, we are blessed. And if limbs wither and speech fails, we are still blessed. So long as this heart beats, I am blessed. For it is our human work, it is our human duty, finally, to rise each day in the face of loss, to rise in the face of grief, of debility, of pain, to move as the turtle moves, her empty nest behind her, her labor come to nothing, up out of the pit and toward the next season's doing. There's a Native American story about how the turtle got the cracks in its shell. One day, the turtle, walking through the forest, met a flock of birds, all noisy and excited about going south. The turtle was curious and asked if they could take her with them. Two of the birds held a stick between them with their feet, and the turtle clamped onto it with her powerful jaws, and in that way they lifted the turtle up and away over the forest. The turtle was dazzled by the view from up there and wanted the birds to explain it all to her. She waggled her arms and legs to get their attention, but the birds took no notice and went on speaking over her head of their own affairs. Then the turtle grunted and groaned with the same results. When at last she could stand it no longer, the turtle opened her mouth to ask the birds what all these things were that she was seeing. That, of course, was a mistake, for now she found the forest rushing up to meet her. She pulled in her head, her arms and legs, and whap, struck the ground, flat on her back. And that's how the turtle's shell got cracked. But the turtle was lucky, for she landed near a pond. She managed to drag her bruised and aching body into the cool water, and then to burrow into the oozy, healing mud at the bottom, and there sleep till spring. To this day, the turtle bears those cracks upon its shell to remind it that it's not a bird. And we bear our bodies, our fabulous and failing bodies, to remind us that we're humans and not angels. No fancy moral here. Simple truths are hardest. I get out of bed every morning to attend to the business of being human, whether that business happens to be dying or doing something else. I get out of bed in the morning to do what good remains within my power to do. And each day, in a small New Hampshire town, Marilyn, a millionaire, rises early to get to the dump to see that all our leavings are well left, to sort the useful from the useless, and to keep from the ground all that might seep to the swamp below, so that beavers will still do their work, and the water rise, and the turtles thrive there, and in the early summers crawl on the land to make their nests, some of them finding their way to the dump, where in years to come, other fathers and other sons, doing their work together, will see them and know this way of dancing.